Good evening, everybody. I'm David Gordon, the proud principal of Pompano Beach High School, and I want to welcome you all back to high school. Some of you were a little late, so detention will be tomorrow. See you at the end of the presentation. Before I put on the suit and the tie, for 20 years I was a teacher in the classroom, and I taught American, world history, European history, and the one area that I always, again, when I got to teaching it was the Holocaust period. And over 20 years ago, it was interesting, not only the students, but the teachers and staff, just how ignorant we were of what occurred at that time during World War II. That's why, for me, this is especially a proud evening, not only because of my students, but because of my big students that have been showing up on Tuesday, too. And I want to congratulate all of you for just a wonderful activity, which I know everyone gained from, and you're going to see the end results tonight. At this time, again, I want to not only thank those students and participants, but the students, teachers, and staff who have shown up tonight. And I'm going to leave somebody out, but again, Ms. Perlowski, Jeff Williams, I know put so much into this, and I know it's going to be great. And also, we have Dr. Parks here, who's our board member. I want to thank him for coming out. Welcome, and please enjoy. And at this time, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Neal, who is the artist in residence. Dr. Neal?
Wow, what a night. It is wonderful to see you all. My name is Karen Neal. I am artist in residence at Florida Atlantic. I am faculty in storytelling studies for the School of Communication and Multimedia Studies and School of the Arts. In 2008, I was asked by Leon Weisberg of the Jewish Federation of South Palm Beach County to get involved in a project that was debuting in the United States. It had been done many, many times in Israel, bringing together Israeli Jewish kids with Holocaust survivors, working for a year and a half, so that the kids would really become witnesses to the witnesses of the Holocaust. Because we know that the best way to pass on information is to first hear the story. Well, unlike what they had in Israel, we had about 4 months to put on that performance, and it was an amazing, amazing success. And Dr. Weisberg and I then went on to consult in Sarasota with the Jewish community there. The difference is very clear here. Here, we are working not with the Jewish community. In Israel, the organization, the agency that put this together was known as Eshel, and it is a Jewish agency that works with senior citizens. And this was considered a very important intergenerational project for Israel, for the seniors and for the students and for the country. This is the first time in the world tonight that non-Jews and Jews have gotten together to acknowledge in this way, in this storytelling and theatrical way, what happened 60, 65 years ago. I cannot overstate how important the work that this group has done is. It's been said that you can't hate someone once you hear their story. You might not be the best of friends, but you can't hate them. Because once we hear somebody's story, we empathize. We take a walk in their footsteps. Well, tonight, unlike when we work with survivors and Jewish kids, when we're working with survivors and non-Jewish kids, we're saying something very important. And it's something that I want to say to all of you, and I'm happy to have played a small part in training the trainers, Ms. Perlowski, and some of Joe and Gertner, and some of the kinder here today.
And that is the reason that the Kinder are alive today is because of what we call righteous Gentiles, because of people who were not Jewish, who empathized, who understood that this was not just a Jewish problem, this was a universal problem. So my hat off not only to the wonderful students, not only to the wonderful Kinder, but to all of you here today, because without any of our ancestors, none of this would have happened. This is a tribute not only to these survivors here, not only to these kids, but to those people who recognized that humans all share a very important legacy. So with all of you, I'm very excited to see what this group has done with this legacy, and I'm delighted to have played a small part.
I'm the Director of Theater Programs at Pompano Beach High School, and I'm very happy to have you in this room this evening. It's been a wonderful, wonderful journey, and I want to thank Rose Gatens for initially calling me up and saying, we've got this project, would you like to do it? My personal background is in theater in education, so I have been trained not just to teach kids traditional forms of theater, but to teach them other things through theater, citizenship, history. So this was just a perfect project for Pompano Beach High School, and it was amazing to me to be able to have two generations in this room for really the first time in my career. theater, but to teach them other things through theater, citizenship, history. So this was just a perfect project for Pompano Beach High School, and it was amazing to me to be able to have two generations in this room, for really the first time in my career, to work with teenagers and then a group of older adults in their 70s and 80s. So it was a new beginning for me. We have spent 11 weeks together every Tuesday, about an hour and a half every Tuesday, and we had a lot of fun. The day was divided.
Of the Kindertransport project. Visit online at kindertransportproject.org.
I'm Ralph Maury, and I'm from Kassel, Germany. I was born in 1930.
I'm Anita Payson, and I was born in Berlin in 1926. I'm Bella Adler, and I was born in Vienna in 1931. And I'm Anita Hopper, and I was born in Berlin, Germany in 1933.
I'm Otto Decker, and I was born in Wiesbaden, Germany in 1930.
I'm John Rosen. I was born in Gelsenkirchen, Germany in 1930.
My name is Dan. I was born a couple of weeks ago.
My name is Diane.
My name is Brian. I was born in
My name is Malcolm Jordan. I was born in Cold. My name is Jill. My name is Brianna. I was born in
There we are.
Witness theater. Emotional telling your story. I wonder what you have to go through when you went through that.
My name is Joe Garten, and I was born in Berlin in 1931, and the story I'm about to tell you took place when I was 8 years old. World War II started in September of 1939. On the 1st of September, Hitler invaded Poland, and on the 3rd of September, England declared war on Germany. And that's part of the story, but what we have to go is a little earlier than that and tell you a little bit of our lives that happened before that time. I'm sure that you remember there was a madman called Adolf Hitler, and he rose to power in the middle and early 1930s. And one of his objects, of course, was to conquer the world, and the other one of his objects was to wipe out the Jews. And they started to pass great laws or bad laws in Germany. Jews couldn't go to work. Jewish children couldn't go to non-Jewish schools. Jews were arrested. Jews were put in concentration camps. He wanted to get rid of the Jews. There's no question about that. But there was a problem here in the world, and the problem was that nobody really wanted those Jews. Nobody wanted to take us in. But there was an exception to that story, and that's what you're about to hear this evening. You're about to hear about our lives before the war. You will hear some nice stories, you will hear some sad stories. And you will hear about an exception to what I just spoke about. And the exception is there was a country, England, that decided to take us in. And that's our story, and all of us are going to tell it to you in a manner that hopefully you will enjoy. It is our lives, and we start now.
I wonder how your life was before the war. Life in Germany was very ordinary before Hitler appeared on the scene. And I was about 8 years old at the time, and I went to school, and then when I no longer could go to a public school, I went to the Jewish private school. But life was not terrible. I went ice skating, I went to the movies, I played with my friends, but it didn't matter.
My name is Hertha Bracker, and I was 14 years old when Hitler came to Austria. And before that, life was really wonderful, and I never thought I would have to leave my home country. I loved Vienna, I thought it was one of the most beautiful cities with lots of culture, and I was lucky enough to be able to go to the opera and to enjoy the theater and so on. And unfortunately, once Hitler's troops marched in with their horrible boots, all that was trampled to bits.
My name continues to be Joe Gardner, and the story I'm about to tell you is when I was about 6 or 7 years old. And my wife is in the audience this evening, and I actually don't think she's heard this story either. I had an older brother who was unfortunately not with us and hasn't been with us for quite some time, but he was about 9 years older than I, and he went to a Jewish school which was in our neighborhood, and it was sports day. And I was going to see how he was doing, and I was going to the school, and I went to the schoolyard, and my brother was doing the shot put. Now, I know the Olympians out there, you know what that's all about. That's a very heavy ball, and you throw it as far as you can. My brother threw it as far as he could, but it landed on my foot. So that's a little vignette of that part of my life. And the other one is really something that is very, very ordinary, and that all of you can probably relate to. I had a scooter. Now that is not the scooter that you people know here. This is a German scooter. This is totally different. This scooter, yes, I found out from the kinder friend of mine, that's not it either, that this scooter was theirs too, and they have great memories of it. And that may sound a little crazy, but I'll tell you what that scooter was all about. It had a pedal, and you stood on that scooter and you pedaled. And I lived across a river, the River Spree, which is the main river in Berlin, and I rode every day on that scooter back and forth and back and forth. That bridge, I remember at that time, was bigger than the Golden Gate Bridge or the George Washington Bridge. We went back to visit that recently, a few years ago, and it's about the size of this auditorium. That's a great memory, and I think I was 6, I think I was 7, and I just kept riding that scooter. And I hope you like that little story.
He yanked by my ear. It was humiliating. But the reason for it, as I suspect, was I was the only Jew in the class, and he wanted to make an example of me. And not only that, I was the only Jew in the school. German government decided that Jewish children should no longer attend the local public schools. What we had to do was attend Jewish schools. Well, in the town in which we lived, there was no Jewish school. So my brother, who was 2 years older, my brother and I, had to ride the streetcar, because the younger people, that's like a bus on rails. We had to ride the streetcar an hour and a half each way, morning and night, so that we could attend a Jewish school. In our neighborhood, there were some young kids who were members of the Hitler Youth. That was a juvenile version of the Nazi stormtroopers. And they liked to get dressed up in their little uniforms. And they liked to wait for us on our way home and throw rocks at us. And I was 6 years old.
Very frightened as to we really shouldn't have been there, and everybody was saluting Hitler, and we didn't want to do that. But he did march down the street, and I did see him, and here it is 7 years later, and I can still remember that.
My name is Rella, and I probably was 7 years old when this happened. Conditions became progressively more dangerous for the adults and the children. And I had lived in an apartment house, and then they proceeded to take something, I don't remember what it was, a lantern, with my hands behind my back. Needless to say, I was really petrified. They walked away. They didn't do anything else. And I didn't cry out. I didn't say anything. There were almost no people in the street. That's why I believe it was a whole Jewish neighborhood. I did see 1 or 2 people, but I didn't say anything, and they probably didn't realize that I was tied to this lamppost. And finally, my brother, who was 15, came down to look for me and untied me. And the second incident really haunts me to this day. I was looking out of the bedroom window, and I saw that the Nazis had painted a huge swastika in the street from sidewalk to sidewalk down the whole street, and lined up were all the old women with pails and scrub brushes scrubbing away at this swastika, and behind them marched the Nazis. You know, once in a while they poke someone, but that's what. And I remember looking at that with my mother. It was in her bedroom, and I said to my mother, why are they doing that? Don't they see that it's not coming out? And I don't remember what she answered me, but I know I went away from that window, and I felt so sorry for these people. But, of course, sorriest that my grandmother was so humiliated in a situation like that.
In addition, they looted and smashed over 75,000 Jewish shops and business throughout Germany and Austria. The following morning, the Nazis roamed around Germany and Austria and arrested 30,000 leaders of the Jewish community and dragged them off to the concentration camps called Buchenwald, Dachau, and Sachsenhausen. I was living in Frankfurt at the time because, as you heard before, even though I was born in Wiesbaden, there was no Jewish school in Wiesbaden. And my parents when I was 6 years old, sent me to Frankfurt with my brother, who had preceded me by a year and a half, to go to this boarding house so that I could attend a Jewish school in Frankfurt. The night before, we were warned in that boarding house that there was going to be a major program throughout Germany and in Frankfurt. We were warned by the guardians who looked after us in that boarding house not to make a noise, not to show a light, and not get out of bed during the night. For an 8-year-old, the night was full of noise and turmoil. Throughout the night we heard sirens of fire engines roaring through the streets, police cars with their police signs waving, going to the places where the synagogues were burning. But they were not going to burn out, to extinguish the fires. The reason why the fire brigades were there was to make sure that during the conflagration of the synagogues, no German property would be destroyed. I remember the terror that I experienced that night, and I guess it took me about 6 more years before I stopped dreaming about it. In the morning, our parents came from Wiesbaden. They took us back to Wiesbaden, and for about 2 weeks we stayed at home until things began to get normal again. And that was Kristallnacht in November of 1938.
I'm Ruth Heinzman. I was born in Kloppenburg, Germany. We had to commute 2 hours in order to attend a Jewish school. The morning of the Kristallnacht, my sister was recovering from surgery. I was the only one approaching the school next to the synagogue burning. I didn't know what to do. I stopped at a rabbi's house, and a neighbor came to me and she said, "Call your home and make sure your family is still home." Then she corrected herself and said, "Oh, the telephone wires have all been cut. You may call a neighbor's home." I called the neighbor and she said, "Your mother is still home." On the way home, on the train, the Nazis were bragging about their accomplishment. And I approached the house and it was plastered with swastikas. And my family, my mother and my sisters were crying. My father had been dragged out of the bed that morning after I left for school. And that was the last time I saw my father.
Remember the Kristallnacht because we lived almost across from the synagogue in Vienna, one of the synagogues, and that had been a place that I used to attend.
For religious services in Hebrew school and so forth. And all of a sudden, the whole shul went up in fire, and the Nazi boys danced around, and in Germany they said, "So wird man's mit den Juden machen." This is how we will do it with the Jews. And I lived with my father, mother, brother, and I. And my father said, "They're going to burn us." Somehow we knew for the first time they're going to burn us.
Ralph Mulrick, and I'm now 8 years old, and I was terrified seeing my synagogue burn. With the falling of Kristallnacht, the Nazis intensified their hatred towards the Jews. In England, Parliament and Sir Winston Churchill were in session preparing a resolution to save an unspecified number of children from what was happening all over Europe at that point, which was arrests and death. The resolution allowed the committees, refugee committees and the Jewish Community Council to mobilize and get the families in England to consider taking in these refugee children. Trains started to roll from Germany, Austria, and other parts of Europe to seaports where ferries were standing, ready to take children across to England. Some 10,000 children were rescued in this manner between the ages of 5 and 17 from December the 1st, 1938 to December the 1st, 1939, September the 1st to the 39 when the war broke out. And in the famous voice of Paul Harvey, when he used to make his news comments, he would say, this became known as the Kindertransport.
When my mother learned that the Kindertransport was willing to take 2 children from each family, she had to make a decision which 2 of the 4 children to send. And she chose the 2 middle ones. My oldest sister had already gotten it for David to come to America. My mother's sister lived in Jacksonville, Florida, and she was instrumental in getting for all her siblings the oldest child an affidavit. And it was Hilda and I, my sister Hilda, who's 15 months younger than I am. I'm fortunate that she is still alive, and we have each other of all the 4 girls.
I'm Lisa. One day, my father came running home, and he had been in what was called in Vienna the Kultusgemeinde. It was the Jewish headquarters, and he had to find a lot of papers for me. And a few drunk Nazis came into this room where all the papers of the Jews were lined up in shoe boxes, and the guy took a bayonet and he just smashed all these boxes. So my father described he was knee-deep in papers, and he was there all night looking for certain papers. If you've seen Schindler's List, they were crazy with the papers, and he had to find certain certificates for me to go on the Kindertransport. And he looked and looked, and finally, by a miracle, he got those papers. And of course, you had to walk. Very hungry, torn shoes. It was like from here to, I don't know, Boga, walking. And he came running home scared, always looking behind him that a Nazi will kill him. It was very late in the game, and they were just killing the Jews on the street of Vienna. And he came running home, and he screamed, Liesel goes tomorrow on the Kindertransport. And he quickly stole a pocket. I was young, and he thought I would lose these precious papers, and then they wouldn't let me go. And I had that pocket with the precious papers, and the next day I went on the Kindertransport.
I was still 8 years old when the Kindertransport started, transporting children from Germany and Austria, Czechoslovakia to England. The conditions under which we left and the conditions that the English placed upon those who came to England were very severe. First of all, you had to be less than 16 years old. Secondly, you had to have permission from your parents to go to England, knowing that those parents could not accompany their children or stay in England with them. Put yourself in the shoe of a parent who has children who are between the ages of 4 to 16, and ask yourself the question whether you could give up your children and send them to a strange land to live with strangers. That was the decisions, those were the decisions that our parents were forced to make for us to get onto the Kindertransport. Many parents, like my parents, and the parents of my brother and I, had the tremendous courage to do that. In my home in Frankfurt, we had 45 boys. An English family decided that they would take 30 boys from that home, bring them to England, and take care of them until they were 14. I forgot to mention that one of the conditions that the English placed on the children coming to England was they could be in no way or circumstance a burden on the English welfare system, which meant that before you went to England, you either had a place to go where people would take care of you, or organizations would take you and look after you for a period of time, or foster parents would come forth and take you and adopt you. As I said, in my home, 30 of the 45 boys were the fortunate ones who were taken in by an English, Jewish banking family by the name of Rothschild. And he agreed to look after us until we reached the age of 14. We were fortunate. Not only were we among the few children that escaped the Holocaust that was to come, the 30 boys who were chosen to go to England were really fortunate, because none of the 15 that stayed behind survived the war.
I am Anita, and I'm 6 years old. I had just turned 6. I was going to Jewish school in Berlin, and every day I took the trolley home from the school. My grandmother, who I called Olmi, would pick me up at the train station. One day, she picked me up, and we took a short walk back to the apartment house. When we got to the apartment house, there were a bunch of people waiting for the elevator. We joined them. We got on the elevator, and just as the door closed, I said, "Oma, why do you hate Mr. Hitler?" Now, this was June 1939. You could have heard a pin drop in that elevator. My grandmother took a deep breath, and she said, "Oma, Anita, I don't hate Mr. Hitler." Well, luckily, we hit the 4th floor, and the door opened. My grandmother grabbed my hand and dragged me down the hallway. We got to our apartment. She opened the door and screamed for my Opa. Opa came, took one look at my grandmother, and picked me up and threw me into my room and slammed the door. Now, I had always been this sweet little girl that nobody treated that way, and I had no idea what I'd done. So I thought, well, the best thing to do is just listen through the door and see what they say. So I listened, and I heard my Oma say over and over again, "We have to get rid of her, or we're all going to be killed." I started to cry, and then I cried and cried until I finally fell asleep. And when I woke up, my mother and my Oma were there, and they said, and I said, "What did I do? What did I say?" And they said, "Nothing, but I don't think you cannot go to school anymore, and you aren't allowed to talk to anybody. And as much as I questioned them, they never told me why. Well, the next few weeks, I had a wonderful time. They took me everywhere, and I visited all the relatives, and I really sort of put the elevator incident in the back of my mind.
My transportation to England was a little bit different. Somehow or other, my mother and my father hadn't gotten a ticket or whatever was required to get on the train in Berlin. So in December of 1938, my mother in Berlin took the train together with my sister, who was 5.5 years older than I. She actually was my surrogate mother. If you will speak to her, she still is in England to this day, never immigrated to the United States. Anyway, we arrived on the German-Dutch border in the middle of a very, very cold, snowy night. And that night we slept in somebody's house. I really can't tell you the name of that person. And the next day, my mother took us to the border, my sister and I, and said goodbye. And you now cross the border. And most of us who live in a gated community know what those poles look like that come down, so we went by that sort of customs house that looked just like that. It had a pole coming down. The German official asked us, "What are you doing?" And my mother, I think, had told my sister, "Tell them that your father is in the hospital in Berlin," or something or other. Anyway, after a little bit of questioning, my sister and I walked across the border. Some arrangements had been made for some Dutch people to meet us, and we were then taken to a camp in Holland, which was actually quite famous, where a lot of other Jewish children were present. Some of us were going to go to England on the Kindertransport. And my sister and I went into this camp, and about a month later, the person came out in the main room and said, "Joe Garten," actually my name wasn't Joe at that time, this is a secret, don't tell it to anybody, it was Josie, J-O-S-Y. Said Josie Garden is now ready to go to England, but they didn't call my sister's name. Somehow or other, my sister got that word to my mother, who said, "Don't let him go." My sister, who obviously was smarter than my mother and myself, said, "Let him go." So I went to England, and I'm happy to report to you that we arrived in England, and a month later my sister came, and that's another story.
I am and I was 15 years old at the time, and we had absolutely, my whole family had no chance to leave Vienna. But all of a sudden, we heard about the Kindertransport, and I was elected to go on a Kindertransport. My brother, who was 3 years younger, was not able to go, and he was very, very unhappy about that. And so was I, because we never were separated. And when I went to England, it was a very, very heart-wrenching goodbye, to say goodbye to the parents and to my brother. And as I went on the train, they handed me a little baby, because I was one of the older ones, and they needed somebody to take care of that baby. And I was really very glad that I could do this, because it took my mind off my sorrow about saying goodbye to my family. This is one of the worst things that anybody can imagine, how hard it is to say goodbye to your mother and father and to siblings, and not knowing if you will ever see them again. And that was my story, how I got to England.
I'm Anita, and I'm still 6. On June 23rd, 1939, I found out that when Oma said that she has to get rid of me, she meant it. That morning, my mother packed my suitcase and took me to the train station. I kept saying, "Where are we going? but my mother kept saying, somewhere nice, and that's all she said. Well, when we arrived at the train station, it was packed with children and adults, and no one looked very happy. The train arrived, and my mother and I got on the train. Later, I found out that the parents weren't allowed to go, but my mother always did things she shouldn't, so she got on the train with me. But I made
seat. I made myself comfortable, and when I got comfortable, I looked up to say something to my mother, and she disappeared. I was 6 years old. No one had told me what was going to happen. I had no idea who was going to take care of me or where I was going. I was so shocked, I started to scream. Suddenly a woman came running, grabbed me by the arm, and took me through the train. She took me to a room that I'm sure was a kitchen because it was all stainless steel counters, and on the top of the counters were a bunch of pots. And I was still screaming, but she just left me in the room and walked out and closed the door. And I cried, and then I thought to myself, now this is ridiculous. My family doesn't want me. Well, that's just too bad. I just got angry. So I jumped on the counter and I knocked down the pots, and then I fell asleep. Well, I had been spoiled all my life. My whole life, my family hugged and kissed me and told me how wonderful I was. And now they just abandoned me on a train. I had no idea where I was going to go. Well, I think that was the moment that I stopped being a sweet little girl and became a little tougher.
I'm Bella, and I'm now probably close to 8, about 7 and a half, a little more. And I knew that I was going to go to England. I knew my mother had been trying very, very hard to get either my brother or myself out of the country, but nothing. I didn't know much more than that. So when we got to the station with our one little suitcase, I saw a lot of children on this platform. And you know, I hadn't seen any children for months. I hadn't been allowed to go to school. It was too dangerous. So to see all these kids, more than I'd ever seen outside of school, I said, oh my.
So we said goodbye, a very hurried, unemotional goodbye. I later learned that the Germans did not allow any emotion on those stations. I did not hear any crying, and if I did, I don't remember it. I got on the train, had 2 days of traveling, I'm told, my other brother, I don't remember, and we were all arrived at this huge European train station, and in the station were seats lined up just the way you see, behind, with children sitting in them, all these children that came up this train, and in the front were long trestle tables with adults sitting behind them with paperwork and pencils and pens, and one by one they began to call out names, single names, 2, 3, it didn't matter. I saw these people, these children, getting up from these chairs and leaving. Where were they going? I had no idea where they were going. And gradually, this station, these chairs emptied out. And when I looked around, there was only me and maybe 1 or 2 other children in this room. And I began to feel so terrible. I can't even express to you what I felt. I felt completely lost and abandoned. It has been terrible in Austria, and now I'm saying, where am I now? What's going to happen to me now? And with that, my name was called, and I went up to the
and there's a middle-aged couple standing there. The woman had a lovely, lovely little doll. I remember those blue china eyes, beautiful doll. And she came forward to embrace me, and I backed away. I completely backed away because I was so lost and felt so alone. Those were not the arms that I wanted. And I know it was disappointing for her. Eventually it turned out much better. But that was the beginning of my arrival in England.
I'm Liddy, and I remember my mother taking me to the train, and we were not allowed to do anything. All of a sudden, people came and told us to come with them, and without the parents, we had to walk towards the train. And they put us in the train, and they were locked the train. Later on, my mother was able to come to the train, and there was no way that you could get another hug or a kiss. And the only way you were able to say goodbye was through the window by doing this. And that's how they answered you.
Now I'm 12 years old, and I'm an only child, and my parents have the terrible job of saying goodbye to me. It was a choice, life or not. And as all the years went by, and you've heard the stories of the sadness of leaving, I have to tell you, the one thing that has always remained with me is the courage of my parents. If it hadn't been that they had the strength to take their only child, go down to the Berlin train station with a lot of other people and say goodbye. I can't even imagine, and I'm sure everybody here too, we have children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren. How was that done? How did they have the strength to do it? I went back to Berlin this past year, and I went back to that station, and it was incredible to think that parents have the inner strength to do this, and they're still my heroes, and I wish I could tell my parents today how proud I am of them.
I'm Hertha Draka, and by now I'm 15 years old and have arrived in England. And I was very, very lucky. I was really in Scotland. I met some wonderful people that took me in their house, and I was a maid in training, but they treated me much more like a daughter. They didn't have any kids. Unfortunately, the war didn't go very well. And I had to leave that area. It was a restricted area for enemy aliens, and I had to leave the area. I had a choice, either London or Glasgow, and I picked London, which was really very lucky for everybody, because in London I couldn't find a job, and I went to the Jewish agency and asked if they could help me find a job. And they said, we don't have a job for you, but the Dominican Republic had just announced that they would take a lot. I think they wanted to take 8,000 Jews. And if you want to sign up, and you can go with the next transport to the Dominican Republic and have your parents come and join you there. It's a neutral country. And since I hadn't heard from my parents for the last year, and I was so worried about them, I grabbed that opportunity. I signed up right then and there. And very few weeks after that, we went with a train to the ship. I remember strange enough, I remember the ship's name, and I forgot it now, which happened. And we went to New York, and our transport was the only one that were guests in New York for 2 weeks. We went a wonderful orphanage on Amsterdam Avenue. We were their guests. And it was really a great time, and I could write to my parents and tell them that I'm in America and that I'm on my way to the Dominican Republic, and I will send them visas, hopefully. And I did that. I went to the Dominican Republic. This ship, I remember, was called the Cherokee, and we landed in Puerto Plata, which was very, very close to where we lived for 11 years. I lived there 11 years. This whole colony is still going on, and my family, part of my family, is still there. It's called Sosua, and it is very close to Puerto Plata. I thought when our ship arrived and when they picked us up from the ship that I was in paradise. It was warm, and as you know, in England it was hardly ever warm, and I just loved to see the ocean so close, and the beach when we came closer to Sosua, it was just fabulous. So very soon I could send my parents visas, and to boot, I met my husband there, who was from Vienna too, and we were married before my parents came. So that must have been a shock when they saw their daughter, again, being a married woman. But they came with my mother-in-law at the same time. So it was great, and my brother was so happy to live there, and so were they. As I said, they are still, part of my family is still there, and they are doing very well. And I will always be grateful to the Dominicans. I had never, in that country, which has a lot of poverty, and it was a very hard life for many people there, never had I encountered any anti-Semitism. They were always wonderful and really tried to help us. And every time I go there, I feel like coming home too. That doesn't mean that I don't love this country. I love America. And I'm very proud that my son was for 28 years in the U.S. Navy, and that my kids went to school here, and my children got married here, and that the whole family loves this country. Thank you very much.
For all mothers in English, pushing out their babies in a small basket to let the river cradle them, and kind hands find and nurture them, providing safety in a hostile world. Our constant gratitude, as in this last century, the crowded trains taking us away from home become our baby baskets, rattling to foreign parts, our exodus from death.
I was alone in a world that had already shut me out. I was silent in a fight that needed my voice. I couldn't see the things that the others had. You could only see what was best for me. All I have of you are the pictures that are slowly beginning to fade, as do my dreams of one day reuniting with all I once knew.
I may resent that you sent me here, but in time I shall only see the good. The hopes that were once there drift slowly away. You saved me, yes you did. Had I realized it, I would have felt differently. You knew what was best. You changed my course. I miss you so much it hurts. I cry to sleep when I think of what your fate may be.
The memories are now all I have until I see you once again. If I had to make the decision, I would not have known where to go. I wouldn't have known where to run. This is why you were there. You were there for so long. I knew one day you might be gone. The reality had set in. My worst fears were realized. I should have gone. It's too late now to change the past. I miss you so much with great respect for what you've done. I miss you so much now and for always.
And I'm still 6. I wish I was aging so slow now. Anyway, if you remember, I was on the train. The train stopped at the Hook of Holland, I later found out. A woman came for me and took me out of the train. And I saw a group of children standing there, and I went over to them, and I said, "Where are we?" And they said, we're in Holland. And I said, "Where are we going?" And they said, "We're going to England." And I said, "England? Really?" And they said, "Yes, we're going to be safe in England, and we're going to learn the language." And I said, "Well, I know the language." "Really? What do you know?" I said, "Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu." I had gone to a Jewish school, and this was a Jewish prayer. Anyway, from the Hook of Holland, I really was in a daze, because at this point I was abandoned and humiliated. So we somehow got to Victoria Station in London, and we were all sitting in groups, I suppose by the numbers that had mysteriously gotten on my chest. Not imprinted, please don't get me wrong, it was a cardboard thing on my chest, sign. And this woman came over, looked at my sign, and motioned I should go with her. And I started to talk to her, and I asked her if she knew my parents, if she knew my grandparents, when am I going to see my father, when am I going to see my cousins, and she never answered. Anyway, we finally got to her apartment in London. Her husband and her 2 teenage daughters were there. Well, no one was thrilled to see me, the 2 teenage girls especially, because I was now going to share a room with them. Mrs. Rusinski, which was the name of the family, showed me the corner I was going to be. I had a little cot and, I guess, some drawers, and that was going to be my little corner. And they ignored me the entire time I was there. They fed me. They did register me in school. And, oh, I guess they don't have it up. I went to school. I got a wonderful report card. And I was with the Rusinskis for a few months. That was really, what an unbelievable change that was. I had told you, I came from this warm, loving family to this home where nobody wanted me. And here I was in England, as Herta had said. It rained, it was cloudy, it was misty, the weather was crummy, and the food, I was used to hot chocolate with schlocks on it, which is whipped cream. They gave me tea with milk. Anyway, I was with the Rusinskis a few months when one day my mother arrived, and I said, "Oh, you know, I was all excited. This is wonderful. Where is my father? Where is everybody?" And my mother told me that we would all be reunited one day. I didn't know it would take me 42 years to find my father and my cousins. Anyway, my mother had gotten a job as a maid in a British home. So off we went to this home in the countryside. And it was lovely, except my mother was a lousy maid, and they fired her after a week. And then she didn't know what to do with me, because they had evacuated all the children out of London. They were awaiting the bomb, so I couldn't go back to London. And she had to go back to London because she had to make a living. So she put me in an orphanage. And the children were very nice there. As a matter of fact, I had my first boyfriend there. He was 7. He tried to teach me this. I'm sorry, honey, but he tried to teach me about what it was like to do those things. Anyway, but he didn't know, honey, honest. And then, after I'd been in the orphanage for a few months, one of the volunteers at the orphanage, Miss A.D. Scott, came over to me and asked me if I would like to come and live with her. And I said, sure. So I went to live with Miss Scott. She lived in Preston near Eastbourne, and she had a home full of children. Some of the children, well, actually, most of them were for Britain, of families that couldn't afford to keep their children at this time during the war. And I think one of the children was from Europe. My best friend Ethel and I did everything together. I loved being there. We